Next slide, please. So today's goals, number one, give you a basic understanding of the new federal climate resilience funding that's available. Number two, an introduction to the Indiana Resilience Funding Hub, which is something new that you'll learn about today. Positioning your community for success in the federal grant process, and then next steps and some upcoming deadlines for securing resilience funding. Next, please. Oh, I want to introduce Cody, who will be talking about some of what's in these new legislative pieces.
Sure. Thank you, Bill. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Cody Smith. I'm a Community Resilience and Outreach Coordinator at the Environmental Resilience Institute. I wanted to start off today with a couple of key points to help build the framework on that first agenda item to help us understand where this new climate resilience funding comes from. So I wanted to start with a brief overview of both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. So starting with the IIJA, which you'll often see referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, this bill was signed into law by President Biden in 2021. And as I mentioned, it is commonly used or referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL. So those are used interchangeably. And it's important to know that those are the same pieces of legislation. Additionally, I thought it was important to highlight for each of you that it was $1.2 trillion in total funding when it was signed in 2021, and $550 billion of that was directed to new infrastructure efforts. Those are outlined here on the right side, and some of those major areas include very relevant areas of funding for your community that could be useful as you seek climate resilience funding. Just pointing out some of the major ones here on the right side. You see that transportation funding, roads, bridges, and that associated infrastructure is a key element of the Infrastructure Act, as well as energy, power, and electric grid investments, natural disaster prevention and mitigation, and more. These slides, as Bill mentioned, will be available, as well as the sources for these items. So you'll be able to browse through those at a later date. I also wanted to start with an overview of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the second major piece of climate resilience legislation that is the catalyst for much of the funding and programs that we'll be discussing today in the context of the hub. This was signed into law by President Biden in August 2022 and directed $369 billion to fund the tackling of climate change in the United States. It helps align the federal government with the Biden administration's goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in half from 2005 levels by 2030. So you can see on the right side here that some of this funding, a big chunk of it is for energy supply. Another large chunk is for business tax credits. And primarily these different areas across here represent different sectors of the economy and different sectors of your community as you work to implement climate resilience through your climate action adaptation planning, in addition to seeking federal funds to help assist with those efforts. We will be discussing a lot of programs today that are results of these investments in climate resilience funding. And we're happy to answer any questions, as Jacob said at the end. Many of these programs additionally are still being formulated by the federal government. And so this is one of the things that we're excited to be a part of at the Environmental Resilience Institute, is helping prepare you for these new programs, decipher some of what may be new language or confusing language, and assist you as you seek to pursue these federal grant opportunities and more. I thought it might be helpful today to start with a couple of examples of programs that are funded underneath each of these bills. So I know this is acronym soup here, but I wanted to start by just providing an example of one program under the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. It gives funding to the Department of Energy, which then has created the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, which is open now for your communities. And Bill will talk a little bit more about this at the end of the webinar today to make sure that you're prepared to take advantage of that funding. Another example from the Inflation Reduction Act, it gives funds to the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, for the climate pollution reduction grants. These are opportunities to reduce pollution related to climate change, including greenhouse gas emissions in your community, and those applications are also open at this point. A third program from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, is giving more funds to the EPA, which is then funneled through states such as the Indiana Finance Authority, which is a quasi-governmental state agency here in the state of Indiana that administers the State Revolving Loan Fund, or the SRF. This provides funding for wastewater treatment facilities and drinking water infrastructure moving forward. So those funds are continuously available for your community, and this is an option for you as well. And then lastly, just one more example that's a little bit more focused on rural communities throughout the state. The Inflation Reduction Act has given the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA, a significant amount more money for the Rural Energy for America program, or REAP. This is an opportunity to connect farmers and small rural businesses with clean energy and energy efficiency funding. And that's an opportunity that exists currently for your community to apply for. We will mention this later on again, but we are having a webinar of this program moving forward later this year. So I'm excited to welcome you all today and give this overview to help frame the discussion we'll be having. But at this point, I'm going to kick it back over to Bill, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the Indiana Resilience Funding Hub.
Thank you, Cody. The hub has only been around for a few months and only slightly longer as a concept, but some of the research that was done earlier, one of our professors at IU, Aaron DeLotte, surveyed 170 communities in Indiana and found that the number one thing that they were lacking in terms of being able to seek these federal grant opportunities was capacity. The time and the people to really spend the time necessary to fill out a grant application and be successful. So part of the hub's mission is to augment the capacity of rural communities to successfully apply for federal resilience funding and for local projects, strengthen community collaborations within the communities and among communities and among the organizations that serve communities already, engage IU faculty and students to provide technical support and professional development opportunities, and provide tools, data, resources, training, and guides. And we'll show you some of that on our website here in a moment. Next slide, please. So again, this is a concept that is still being developed. And one of the reasons of having a webinar is to get your ideas about maybe some things that we could add to this or things we've missed, or your questions will probably inspire us to flesh out this model a great deal. But this is a one-year pilot project. It's been funded by the Rural Climate Project and the Energy Foundation. And our goal is to have 5 to 8 grants submitted in the pilot year and work with up to 12 other communities in other ways. And we think goal number 2 will be exceeded. We probably already worked with more than a dozen communities on their grant program so far, but we are focused primarily on communities of 50,000 or less, but the Greater Environmental Resilience Institute is also helping us look at larger communities at the state of Indiana, large metropolitan areas. So no matter what size community you are, we're interested in hearing what your questions are and seeing what ways we can help you. But the basic idea here is we have 3 pillars: the faculty research, student engagement, and service to Indiana. So the faculty research we've mentioned already, but faculty have created a number of tools and data sets that any community can use in their grant applications. We have pioneered the use of McKinney Climate Fellows to augment communities in terms of their capacity. And we will have 4 dedicated climate fellows for this particular project. And then we are collaborating with the Center for Rural Engagement and other organizations across Indiana to try to figure out how best to engage with Hoosier communities. So one part of this diagram I want to highlight is that we are not pushing grant funding on communities. We are asking communities what initiatives they are interested in pursuing and what sort of funding they need for that. And then we'll try to match up the grant programs that they may be eligible for and let them know what they need to do to get lined up for that. Next slide, please. So how we can help, ERI has been around since 2017. We've been developing networks, working with over a dozen communities on their climate action plans. We've worked with communities on greenhouse gas emissions inventories and various other technical aspects to build their capacity. That network is something that you can rely on. We can connect you to people that have maybe done similar projects in the past. We have technical expertise on our faculty that can be brought to bear. We have a full-time grant assistant who will work with communities that are part of that 5 to 8 cohort. And then we want to provide information resources to you, and our website has a number of resources that you will find very interesting. Next slide, please. So if you go to our website, and there is a QR code for that on the left and the shortened URL below that, you will find the most important thing there is the contact form. And we are in the process of loading up our funnel with people that have questions that maybe want to work with us as a part of this project, or just looking for basic information about the grants that are out there. So fill out that contact form. We will get back to you. We may have a meeting with you. We may decide that you are one of the communities that we want to work with. But regardless of that, we'll try to help direct you in the right direction and find the help you need. We have developed a couple of fact sheets that are 2-pagers, so that if you're digging into climate pollution reduction grants or energy efficiency and conservation block grants, we have fact sheets for those on our website. You can also sign up for future webinars. There's a number of hubs and portals we've relied on. And I think you will find that portals like the climate program portal have all sorts of information on upcoming deadlines and webinars and other resources that you may need. And then there are various guides that have been put together by mayors' organizations or county organizations, various types of national organizations that put together guides for these massive programs that you will find helpful to save you time. And then finally, a list of tools that you might need if you're trying to determine whether you qualify as an energy community or a vulnerable community or environmental justice community. There are all sorts of tools to help you identify those things on that website. So I'm going to hand this off to Kate Rasick now, and she will tell you more about the grant writing process.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining all of us today. I'm Kate Rasick, and I serve as the Community Funding Specialist for the Hub. For 13 years now, I've supported the development, the preparation, and the submission of federal grant applications. And with that expertise and that experience, some of which has aged me tremendously, I'm here to help demystify the process of federal applications and to help you in your communities to pursue some of these funding opportunities. So without even knowing at the moment which particular grant opportunity you may be pursuing, you need to ensure that your organization, your community, is registered with SAM.gov. In order to do business with the federal government, you need to be registered in SAM. It's a free process, but it does take time on your part to submit, and takes even more time for your application to be reviewed and approved. So if you haven't started already, please start that registration process today. A registration in SAM.gov enables you to receive a UEI, a unique entity ID, which some of you may remember the precursor to the UEI, which was the DUNS number, and that's been replaced by the UEI. So a UEI will enable you to create an account in grants.gov, which is the electronic portal that will be used in most, but not all of these funding application processes. Next slide, please. So again, even if you don't know at the moment exactly which funding opportunity you're going to be pursuing, you can still ready your community and your organization by pulling together language and information around the problem you are trying to solve with this funding. So the following 10 prompts are adapted from a long-standing proposal criteria that's used by one of the federal funding agencies. And I have found it in these last 13 years to be the best framework for pulling together really any type of proposal, the language and the information that you need to submit pretty much any type of proposal. So the first is you state the problem. And then next, you talk about how it's working, what's currently being done to solve that problem or address that problem is working, but not great, and maybe it's not sustainable. And then next, you're going to talk about what's new in your proposed solution and application and why it's going to be successful. Next, you're going to talk about your team. You're going to start to build language around your team. So the people in your organization or your communities and the partners that you're going to bring along with you to make this project or this program impactful and meaningful and successful. So you can start to get those people on board now and make sure they know that you're going to be asking them for a letter of support when the application time comes. And next, you can start to build language around the environment where your project or your program is going to take place. And you can talk about tangible things like what equipment, what software, what facilities do you already have that the federal government does not have to pay for that will be contributing to the success of this project or this program. And you can also talk about intangible things. What else is going to support this this project that you're proposing? So the expert advice that you're going to receive from ERI, that you have an enthusiastic community, that you have support from stakeholders. And speaking of stakeholders, who have you talked to? Who cares about this project in your community? And what's the impact of the project going to be? And then also on prompt number 8, what are the risks for this project, and what will you do to address them? And number 9, what does success look like if this project goes forward? And how will you know that you've been successful? What milestones will you hit and when? What metrics are you going to be gathering along the way to show that you're improving? And how will you gather feedback to make sure you know you're on the right path and if you need to adjust as you go forward? And then finally, the last prompt is about the budget, which we'll talk about on the next slide. So along with the words and the language that you're crafting with those 9 previous prompts, you're going to have to start thinking of the numbers and the funds that you want to receive through these grant opportunities. But if you're not sure right now which funding opportunity you're going to be pursuing, you won't know exactly how long it's going to take, because you won't know at this moment if the funding opportunity will give you 1 year or 2 years or more. So my advice to you now is to just think of the whole total project and what it would take to complete the whole total project, the problem you're trying to solve, and start to get estimates and ask other communities in Indiana or beyond about their similar projects and what it took for them to complete those projects. And as you plan out the budget, you can consider overarching federal guidance, which is, it's always sort of in quotes, necessary, allowable, allocable, and reasonable, which is the next, if you can go forward, Cody. Yep. That's the overarching how to spend federal dollars, that they meet those 4 criteria. And you can start to set up budget categories. So though it may differ slightly from one application to another, all budgets more or less are going to follow these general budget categories. And I'm just going to talk about a few of them right now. So personnel, think about what personnel, what staff you'll need to make this project or program successful. Do you need to hire some new people? Do you need to take a portion of someone's current time and allocate it to this project? And think about who's going to run it, who's going to manage it, who's going to be in charge of the reporting to the federal government, and who's going to be communicating with all those stakeholders throughout the program or project. And for the other categories, of course, you're going to be looking at the big ticket items like equipment and construction and supplies. But remember the spirit behind these funding initiatives, which is outreach into the community, Justice 40, education, inclusion of historically underrepresented groups, and the groups and individuals disproportionately affected by that problem you've identified in your community, whether it be pollution or safety or high energy costs, and consider how you're going to meet those, the spirit of the funding initiatives. Are you going to have budget for promotional materials? Are you going to budget for a consultant, translation of materials into other languages or into local tribal languages? Those are things that you can also consider here. And finally, cost share. So don't be scared away if you see that the funding opportunity that you're interested in requires cost share. Because again, the spirit of these initiatives in this funding is to get the money into the hands of communities that don't normally see these funds. And we're seeing variety of what cost share or match requirements are looking like. So sometimes they're fairly rigid, that it's 20% of a cash monetary contribution. For instance, I attended the Safe Streets for All webinar yesterday, and there is a 20% match, but they're very lenient and very flexible in what that 20% can be. It can be in-kind donations, it can be contributed personnel time, contributed expertise, as long as it's non-federal funds going to that whole total project. So again, don't be scared away if you see that there's a cost share requirement, because more often than not, there's some workaround with the match requirement. So again, what can you do now? Just start to remember that your application of what you're going to do with these federal funds it's a combination of words and numbers. So the words and numbers tell a comprehensive story of what you're proposing to do with these federal funds. The numbers support the words and vice versa. And there's just going to be some general components, though again, they'll vary slightly from initiative to initiative. But these are just some general forms that you're going to see. In that first, they are actually referred to as standard forms. You're going to see the abbreviation SF in front of some numbers. And they're going to look fairly intimidating. They're going to look very federal, but really it's just filling out information and checking some boxes. And again, you see the narrative, that's your story, that's where you're taking all that language. You'll have a budget, the numbers, but you also have words to accompany the budget justification or budget narrative, letters of support from your stakeholders, and usually resumes, like one-page CVs, and they can be referred to as bio sketches or resumes or CVs. And then there might be, since we're talking a lot of funding proposals based around data, there might be some certifications or additional supplementary materials that you might be needing to provide with your application. So when you do finally decide on which application that you're going to be pursuing, that you can meet the deadlines, it's a good fit for you, and your program's a good fit for that agency and the mission of that particular funding opportunity. My overarching recommendation, and I think it's more than a recommendation, I think it's a rule, that you write for the reviewer. So there's going to be tired humans on the other end who are going to be receiving all these applications, and they're going to be sifting and sorting through all of them and reading them and evaluating them and scoring them, and hopefully for you awarding them. So how do you write for the reviewers? You are going to first, next slide, Cody. Thank you. You're going to follow instructions, and then you're going to double check that you followed the instructions. The margins, the fonts, the page limits, all those things are important. And just don't give them an excuse to mark your application as non-compliant. And you're going to break up all that text, leave some white space, even if it's the requirements are single spaced, leave some white space, add some impactful images and graphics, and make sure those images and graphics also print out and they look that you can comprehend them and understand them in black and white, because we all know color ink is very expensive, and not all these reviewers working for federal agencies are okay to be printing out in color. So assume that your application, even though you're submitting online, is going to be printed out. To that end, avoid using URLs. Some guidelines even go as far to forbid URLs. The National Science Foundation says you can't have any URLs in your application, because if it's important enough for the reviewer to know to score your proposal, it should be in your proposal. It shouldn't be one click away, which of course, if I'm reviewing your application on paper, I can't click away anyway. And finally, use the scoring criteria that is provided in the guidelines, because that's what the reviewer is going to be using to review your proposal. So that was a lot of information, but these are all going to be on the slides for you that you can refer to time and time again. So in sum, start your SAM.gov registration, then do your grants.gov registration. Start putting pen to paper, so to speak, and start crafting language and words and numbers around that problem you are trying to solve in your community. And then when it comes time to apply, make sure you start early, because there's always technical glitches, not necessarily on the side of the federal government with their electronic portals, but always on my side, always on your side. So make sure you start early, and remember those reviewers on the other end. So that's my part, and I'm going to hand it back to Bill, who's going to wrap up and give you all some reminders of what is coming next.
Thank you very much, Kate. We are watching grant opportunities come and go, and you may panic if you see a deadline that is already passed for something that you thought you may have qualified for. I would say be patient. You may see it come back around again. We've already seen some of these programs that had deadlines pass, and then there's opening up a new round of funding. So pay attention to those announcements, but if you're not quite ready yet, get ready for the next round. There'll be more. So April 28th is an important date for two major grant programs, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. That's some automatic pass-through funding for a number of communities in Indiana. We do have a cheat sheet for that. That is due April 28th, which is tomorrow. And most of the communities we've talked to are on target and on track to make their submittals for that pre-application, which is a simplified version of what they will be doing in the future. The other big deadline, April 28th, is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, notice of intent for the major metropolitan areas, which in Indiana would be Indianapolis. But importantly, if you live near Chicago or Cincinnati or Louisville in Indiana, you could also sign on to the planning effort of your local MSA. But an important thing to know, and this is not an April 28th deadline, is that you should contact your MSA or your state lead to make them aware that you want to be included in the planning effort. If you are in the planning effort, you are eligible for $4.6 billion in competitive implementation grant funding. So it's critical to be part of that planning effort for this particular program. And again, the state of Indiana has signed on. They will get $3 million for planning. Indianapolis MSA, Chicago, Cincinnati, Louisville, they've all signed on, and they will get $1 million for planning. So they are going to be doing some planning, and hopefully they will include you. You can be part of the state plan or part of the MSA plan, or you can actually be part of both. And that's an interesting opportunity, I think. The next webinar in this series will be May 11th, Positioning Farmers and Rural Businesses for Clean Energy Leadership. And you can sign up on our website for that. May 31st is the deadline for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, full planning grant application for metros. June 1st is the USDA Urban and Community Forestry Grant application that's due. This is a major funding program, and the grants range from 50 or 100,000, I think, to into the millions. So this is something you want to be aware of if you have a forestry grant idea. And then June 1st is also our next webinar, Leveraging Federal Resources Through State Programs with the Indiana Finance Authority. And June 10th, Kate mentioned she was at the webinar for Safe Streets for All. That Department of Transportation program has a due date of July 10th. And these are planning grants and implementation grants through that program. So with that, we've covered a lot of ground. I do want to make sure you know that we are still designing this plane as we're flying it. We're running down the runway and getting ready to take off. And we could use your suggestions. If you are an organization that works with rural communities and you'd like to collaborate with us in some way, we would love that. We've been reaching out to potential collaborators. So if you are in that group, please make sure that we know you are interested in what you would like to participate in. I think we want to spend the rest of our time together answering your questions and taking your suggestions. So I will turn it over to Jacob to moderate that discussion.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, we already have some questions coming in, and I encourage everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. It'll be helpful if we have them in the chat so that we can refer to them later and make sure we're getting all the information you ask about back to you. So Bill, going back to the slide you were just talking about, there was a specific question about the CPRG. Do we know the email address of the state lead for a community to say they're interested in being part of the planning effort?
We will get that address, but the state lead organization is IIJA.
Great. And then we had some other questions about how the funding hub can help communities. So can you go over how the funding hub is defining rural community, and also can you speak to the role that the fellows specifically play? Are they going to be working with communities directly, or do they have some other role? Great
question. The definition of rural in this case is under 50,000, 50,000 and under. Again, if somebody is in a community like Columbus that's 55,000, we're still going to find a way to work with them. And if even larger communities can work through us through the larger Environmental Resilience Institute and other resources at IU. But we really don't want to turn anyone away. We want to make sure that we've attempted to answer your questions or direct you to someone who can answer your question. We have been corresponding with EPA and other grant makers as questions come up that we can't answer, and we're happy to continue to do that. We learn a lot from that process. We've asked some questions of the funders who they didn't know the answer to them yet either. So some of these programs are still being designed at the federal level. So your questions help them put together their programs as well. And the second part of that question was what, Jacob?
About the fellows, what the fellows specifically will be doing and how they'll be collaborating with communities.
Yes, and we hope that they will be helping directly add to the capacity of those communities that are selected for this full pilot project. So those 5 to 8 communities, they will see some direct contact from our staff, from Kate, from one or more of the climate fellows. And we think what they can help with is logistics, with data, with surveys, with maybe community meetings, helping us with correspondence and agendas, and keeping track of all this and making sure that we are tracking the stories as they happen so that we can tell a story to our funders and hopefully grow this project so that this pilot year leads to more capacity, more employees working on this, more students assigned, so that we can continue to develop the capacity. And then hopefully also allow us to stick around for the full grant process. And so we hope to be able to continue with these communities as these grant programs roll out and they have reporting and other administrative issues to deal with.
Thanks, Bill. So another question we had was about getting updates from the climate program portal on when new grant opportunities are added. But I wondered if there's a broader question to start with, and maybe this is for you, Kate. What does the rhythm of these grants coming out look like? And how can communities kind of engage with the pace of these programs rolling out? And then we can specifically answer the question about the climate program portal email.
Sure. It's a lot, isn't it? And I think it's going to take a community of all of us to be tracking and to keeping on top of everything. The federal government was concerned about the administration change. So without getting into the political environment in 2 years, they wanted to ensure that these funds made their way out into the community as quickly as possible. So I was asked early on, well, are the application forms and sort of the very clunky federal eased application process, is that going to be eased somewhat? And what we were told at the hub is no, because the impetus was get the funding out the door as quickly as possible. And so some of the guidelines and some of the reporting requirements are being softened a bit, like in the form of vouchers for some of the programs instead of a typical grant. But it's a lot. Again, just because it's fresh in my head, the Safe Streets for All program that was released this week and is due in July. And if you're interested, there's upcoming webinars for that program, and they're recorded and they'll be hosted online. They have to spend down a significant amount of funds, and they have to do it quickly. So that there's rules embedded in this legislation about how quickly things need to get out and be spent down. So is there a rhythm or reason? I haven't seen that yet, but this is all very new. It's new to the federal, the program officers at these agencies. You know, it's unprecedented. And so everyone's just kind of trying to figure it out. And I think that if we can create a community here through the hub and through all of you to just feel comfortable to ask those dumb questions. Like there's no dumb questions, right? But you might feel dumb for asking them, but please don't, because we're all trying to make sense of all this really good funding and make sure that it gets into our communities. So the climate program portal is one of those resources that we have found to be really helpful. And again, they too are just trying to make sense of all the data that's coming out from Washington. And I've subscribed to pretty much everything that they send out. I don't think they have like a notification. I think they have a weekly summary that comes out. So sign up for that. And the weekly summary will tell you what things are new for that week. And then also they've been having a monthly call, usually around like the 25th or so of each month, where they go over some general things, but then they might just highlight one specific funding opportunity.
Thanks, Kate. As a reminder, please send your questions in the chat and we'll be happy to get to them. So one question we had come in related to how communities talk about climate and pollution challenges. I wondered, again, backing up one step, Bill, could you talk about when ERI discusses resilience and climate adaptation and mitigation? What does that mean, and what kind of falls under that broad umbrella? Because sometimes they can be people can attach specific meanings to them. But could you speak to what does ERI think of resilience as meaning for communities, and then in a community, how can folks start addressing them?
Well, first of all, I would say that there's really something in these programs for everyone, whether you are concerned about climate change or resilience, or you just want to improve the energy efficiency of your local library or your home, or you want to make housing more affordable by lowering the utility bills. And in terms of the Environmental Resilience Institute, we talk a lot about resilience because that's going to be important in the future as the environment changes. And we're already seeing that in Indiana. Indiana is not immune to change. But whether you participate in adaptation, which would mean you're trying to think ahead about what future threats you might face and what future risks, how do you adapt to heat, drought, flooding, et cetera. Or whether you want to try to be a part of the solution in terms of reducing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the pollution in the atmosphere, or pollution in the water. There's a wide range of things that you can get involved with this funding. And so I think every community is going to have a different take on this. I think it's interesting that the state of Indiana has signed on to a complete climate pollution reduction grant program. It's hard to say. And the major metropolitan areas have signed on to climate pollution reduction grants. So I think it's easier to talk about climate in Indiana now than it ever has been. And things seem to be moving more in that direction as people come to the recognition that things are changing and we should be ready for the future. So resilience is about being able to respond to change and being able to bounce back. And there are a number of funding programs here that would help with that. So it's about safety, it's about comfort, it's about economy, energy efficiency, job creation. It's the future. So I think there's a great deal of opportunity here. We're not, again, pushing any of this on people. We are trying to find people who have projects that they want to find funding for, or they want to plan for the future. We want to help them find that funding and be comfortable with the projects that they're undertaking and the funding that they're seeking. So if we can be helpful in that regard, if we can, speak to your government organization or your local Rotary, or whatever you think would be helpful. We're happy to help reach out.
Thanks, Bill. Kate, you mentioned this in your section of the PowerPoint. A lot of these grants call out specific communities that they are prioritizing. So I was wondering if you could speak more about the Justice 40 initiative, and then also how are rural communities prioritized in these grants, and is there a certain approach communities should be taking to position themselves within those criteria?
Sure. And Cody, maybe you can put up the link for the webpage for Justice 40. So the Justice 40 initiative is, in sum, that 40% of this funding will go towards, and I want to make sure I have that language right. So for the first, I'm just going to read straight from the site, so I make sure I have the language right. For the first time in our nation's history, the federal government has made it a goal that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. So most of these funding initiatives are going to require you to make sure those stakeholders that you're bringing to the table and asking to the table are from these groups. And there's numerous tools available online from the federal government and from other kind of third-party data policy agencies where to help you identify what determinants to use in your as you prepare to solve those problems in your community, to identify which criteria to use and what criteria the federal government is asking you to use. So that's something to just keep in mind as you consider who to bring to the table to discuss these programs and problems and projects in your community. And right, and sometimes we know it's not just inviting people to the table or groups to the table, it's not bringing them to your table, but going to their table and asking them where the problems are and what solutions and answers are they trying to see. So again, that's the spirit of all this funding that's rolling out.
Well, thank you, Kate. And Jacob, if you don't mind, I'll jump in and add another resource for folks that we've actually used to help develop the hub. I've shared in the chat the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This is a tool that was developed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, along with an interagency council to help define what disadvantaged communities are. And so you can browse this map to figure out whether or not your community meets those parameters and then how it might inform your applications for federal grant funds under both the Inflation Reduction Act and for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I will end by noting for the Justice 40 initiative in particular, there are some projects that are some programs that are designated and some that are not. So it's important to know that when you're applying, you can meet those criteria, but some of the programs you might be applying for may not be a designated program. And so it might be an added benefit to be able to demonstrate that you are a disadvantaged community, but of course, knowing whether or not you meet that status would help prepare your application for the requirements of the program.
And I think that's an area where we can help more than the 5 to 8 communities, the other communities that are looking for data and looking to see what categories they fit in. We have some tools to help with that. And there are other tools on the ERI website, like Cody mentioned, but there are also some tools in our drop-down menus that help you map things. One of the interesting programs is there are quite a few tax incentives for businesses and others. Even if you don't pay taxes, there's a program where you can be incentivized to do certain things. But some of those incentives start at 30%, and then they can jump up to 40% or 50% based on whether you are in, say, an energy community, which we have a number of energy communities in Indiana that may have had coal mines or oil wells or whatever, and you can map that sort of thing using these tools and see if you qualify for those extra credit incentives.
We have another question, kind of building off this, maybe getting a little more specific. How can the Resilience Funding Hub, the Highlight program, help CBOs or community-based organizations and communities of color with grants? And Bill, I wondered if this would also be a point to bring up the environmental justice grants that EPA has been doing. Yeah, Bill, do you?
Yeah, one of the interesting grant opportunities that passed us by, but we think it's coming around again, are the environmental justice grants. Money going to government, but also to collaborations among community-based organizations, and they're encouraging 3 or more community-based organizations to collaborate. So if there is a project that you're working on where there are multiple entities that are focused on the same thing, anything from community health to maybe community solar, whatever. If you have a number of organizations in a particular region or community that are working together on something, that there's an opportunity there in the IIJA grant program that we think is very interesting, and we hope to get more information out on that particular program.
Thank you. Another question I had was, there's the grant application process, which takes a lot of effort. And then there's the grant administration process, which arguably maybe takes even more effort. Bill, I wondered if you could talk about how some conversations we've been having with like MSAs or other regional organizations that might be able to help communities that are maybe lower capacity with that implementation phase. So could you speak to the benefits of partnering to not only write a grant, but then also implement it?
Yeah, I think that's a key concern that we have, and that's why we've been talking to the Indiana Association of Regional Councils. We've been talking to grant writers. If this is a one-year pilot and the grant program lasts for several years, we don't want to leave people hanging. We want to make sure that there is some program or consultant or agency in place that can pick up that ball and run with it. And we found that at least the regional commissions, the regional planning commissions that we've talked to are interested in participating and collaborating. And we've talked to some grant writers that are also interested. So I think if we are not able to continue, if the hub does not receive more funding and we can keep on rolling, that's going to be a key thing that we'll need to make sure that we have a handoff process in place as part of this group of 5 to 8, that we don't want to leave anybody in a lurch, and we don't want them to get into trouble down the line with their reporting. And we certainly don't want to get in trouble down the line with reporting as well. So that is a key question and a problem that we're trying to solve. And we hope that maybe some of the people on this webinar have some ideas about that. But we're encouraged already that people see this as an opportunity to collaborate with us and fill in the gaps. Great.
Okay, I think we are getting close to the end of our hour, and I think we've gotten through all the questions in the chat. I also see we've gotten a lot of submissions to our contact form, so I want to encourage folks one more time to fill out that contact form so we can stay in touch and figure out how to help your community more specifically. Bill, would you like to wrap us up?
Yes. Again, thank you all for being part of this. We are looking forward to hearing your ideas and looking at your questions and see if we can help you get answers to those questions as soon as possible. But stay tuned. spread the word, participate in our future webinars. And if you have a topic for a future webinar or an expert, let us know that as well. And we'll put you in the lineup. And again, thank you for coming, and we appreciate all that you do already, and we look forward to working with you in the future.